I'm just going to quickly run into this and introduce Justine. So the panel is Transitional Justice, Artists' Recommendations for Better Public Policy. And I've been shaping this with Justine. We, the team, have been shaping this with Justine for many months now, in the hopes of both inviting specifically people within policy, people who don't necessarily have a foot in culture yet, to make it a little bit more accessible. So it's kind of like quite rapid fire. Also, the idea is then to take some of these ideas and create a recommendation document after. So this is just the first step. So Justine Okolodkoff is a Brussels and Paris-based documentary director and advocate for LGBTQIA+ and women's rights. Amongst many hats, Justine wears, she is a deputy director at Règles Élémentaires, where she was previously head of advocacy. So she really has a lot of knowledge around advocacy and strategies, helping to raise awareness on period poverty and taboos related to periods across Europe. Their work and approach questions how stories we are told define us and how shaping new ones can create bridges and conflict resolution. I'm going to end at that and hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Chantal. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being early birds. Good morning to all of you. I'm really happy and really grateful to arrive the last day because I got to listen to you during these past few days and to see your work. So thank you so much for everything you do already. So now today what I would like to start with is to first focus on the transitional aspect of transitional justice. What do we talk about when we talk about transition? Usually we talk about transitioning to a new system, more democratic societies and new rules and new laws, which means also bringing societal and policy changes. So this is what I would like us to think about today, but usually policymaking is seen as something quite technical, something quite elitist, while it can also be a tool for citizens, civil society, and artists. So that's how I would like today to focus the talk, and also by focusing on the pillars of transitional justice. So that's why we're going to be talking about truth, justice, memory, and also changes and constitutional and lasting changes. So thank you very much for being here. I would like first to ask you to introduce you and your work, and maybe how you can relate in your work to arts and policies in...
slide order?
Yes.
Jessie, Sasha, and...
Okay, so it's the good order, so we can start. So if you would like to say a few words about yourself and your work first.
All right. Good morning. I thought sitting on this edge will make me the last person. My name is Joseph Ben Kaifala. I'm from Sierra Leone. I am the principal of the Center for Memory and Reparations, and we facilitate remembrance and collective narratives around the Sierra Leonean Civil War, which occurred between 1991 and 2002. The work is to ensure that we follow through with the work that the Sierra Leone Truth and Reconciliation Commission did, particularly focusing on amplifying the voices of victims.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jesse Krimes. I'm a multimedia artist based in the United States. I am also the founder and director of the Center for Art and Advocacy. And so I have my own independent art practice. I was incarcerated pretty much since the age of 13. I've transitioned through nearly every facet of our criminal justice system. And so when I came home, I was getting exhibitions, but I was seeing that there were no real support structures for other artists who were also system impacted. And from that, I started the Center for Art and Advocacy. We fund artists across the country. We have a new gallery space in Brooklyn so we can showcase their work. We partner them with advocates and advocacy organizations across the country. And we're building a residency program in Pennsylvania, which I can talk a little bit more about and why that's important. And we're also starting an academy program where we're building a curriculum to work with institutional partners across the country where they can take on our curriculum and work in proximity to directly impacted communities that surround those institutions.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sasha, and I am representative of the Ukraine War Archive. This is a huge unified database that collects evidences of Russian war crimes and also the evidences of Ukrainians' life during the full-scale war, this full-scale war. And specifically, I am a curator of the Documentevis Interdisciplinary Art Laboratory. This is a project that was founded and launched last year in order to make artists work with the materials of the Ukraine War Archive and to interpret, to bring their own vision into archival materials and to seek more truth. I think as for the transitional justice, we're more on the first stage, probably, but still this is the project that is still in process, and we will have the final result just in a week. We will have an exhibition within the frame of the oldest Ukrainian documentary film human rights festival, DocuDays.ua, and I hope it will really amplify our voices, and we are going to proceed this route, to proceed this project in terms of cultural diplomacy, and with the help of this project created based on the materials of the Ukraine War Archive.
Good morning. I'm Hannah Meszaros Martin. I'm a co-director of Plano Negativo, which is a group dedicated to investigative aesthetics and the broader field of forensic architecture in Colombia. And I'm also a fellow of forensic architecture, which is the media and spatial research agency based in London and in Goldsmiths. I presented yesterday on the work that I led on behalf of forensic architecture with the Colombian Truth Commission from 2019 to 2021 when we launched our joint collaboration exhibition called Traces of Disappearance. Since that exhibition has opened and has been traveling around the country and also globally, we started to receive a lot of calls from different civil society organizations, lawyers groups, NGOs, victims advocacy groups who had seen the work in the exhibitions or online, and started to think that they wanted to get involved with the methodologies that we were using of visual research. And we started to work pretty much immediately after we launched the exhibition, working on a case of a young protester who was killed by the anti-riot police in Bogota. It is a legal case. It's still ongoing. And from that moment, Plano Negativo started to get more momentum. We formalized ourselves as a nonprofit. And now we are working on 5 different cases, which some of them, actually, this is one on the screen. This is a case that is my own personal work about the history of aerial fumigation with herbicides over so-called illicit crops. This is a practice that has destroyed the lives and livelihoods of many farmers living in the rural countryside. So with two remote sensing scientists who we've been working with for many years now, we've been looking into the connections between the practice of aerial fumigation and deforestation on a mass scale in one of the regions in Colombia where fumigation was very intensively used. This is just to give you an example of one case that we're doing, but I'm happy to talk about other things.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So then my next question is about justice and about the origin of each of your projects, like the one you were talking about, and how it was rooted in justice, or how the question of justice came along the way. So maybe about the genealogy of justice in your project. So I guess we can follow the same order, if that's okay for you.
All right. So I grew up in the as Liberian and Sierra Leonean Civil War. I was a kid when the Civil War started, and at the end of the Civil War, I left the country to study in Norway. And when I went back to the country, the TRC, Truth and Reconciliation Commission's work was just done. However, I saw that many of the victims were still suffering in the country, because what had happened was that the politicians who wanted to move on pretty fast and not have to deal with the consequences of an 11-year civil war dropped a phrase. It was a very crafty move, and they repeated it over and over, and people started to believe it. It's forgive and forget. Sierra Leone is a very religious society, so it was very easy for us to forgive one another. But this idea of forgetting was sort of a dismisser, because if you continuously tell people to forget, then they cannot come to you to do what the TRC recommended, which is that the government of Sierra Leone had a primary responsibility to implement its recommendations. For those of you who don't know very much about the Sierra Leonean Civil War, it was very brutal. Everything was intentionally orchestrated. The use of children in armed conflict, the brutal amputation of civilians, rape as a weapon of war. So all these victims were still suffering in society, disregarded. And even as a freshman in college, I thought this was just wrong. But one of the things that was happening also was that those who suffered the brunt of the Civil War were not in dialogue with the young generation of Sierra Leoneans. So what I decided to do at that time was to create a project I call the Sierra Leone Memory Project. We went around the country talking to victims and perpetrators of the conflict and bringing that information to classrooms and institutions across the country so that people can have a face-to-face moment in addition to what the TRC had done, in order to make sure that we are taking these recommendations very seriously and ensuring that the victims do not continue to suffer among those. Because the ultimate work of truth commissions is to prevent recurrence. But when grievances remain and human suffering remain in society, it is very difficult to prevent recurrence. It is after that we transformed the Sierra Leone Memory Project into a think tank, sort of, because I realized that most people also have never read the Truth and Reconciliation Commission reports and recommendations. So we created the center as a think tank to facilitate remembrance and collective narrative so that we can continuously engage with the TRC reports and recommendation. and really focus on this idea of justice, because the TRC was very survey in our case. It realized that the country had been destroyed, it was poor, we were not going to be able to provide reparation to all victims of the conflict. So it created about 5 categories of victims that were to receive material reparations. And the rest of the country, it's recommended symbolic reparation as a form of healing and justice. And therefore, the center's focus is on symbolic reparations. And one of the elements of that is that Sierra Leoneans believe in the traditional burial rights. But we could not do these things while we were on the run for our own lives. So one of the things that the center does is focus on identifying, mapping, and protecting mass graves that were left by the Civil War. And the TRC estimated that there were more than 100 mass graves around the country. We've only been able to identify and protect about 24 of those. What we do is we offer resources to the communities where these mass graves exist so that they can conduct their traditional burial rites as a form of collective healing. I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, so I think that kind of the generality of justice, particularly within my practice and within the Center for Art and Advocacy, you know, if you think about incarceration in the U.S. is the most punishing tool that they use against its citizens. And so we currently have over 2 million people who are incarcerated and over 7 million people who are under some form of carceral control. And if you think about it, what incarceration is, in many ways, it's the continuation of slavery. And so it is the ending of slavery and people working on plantations to now using the 13th Amendment as a tool to criminalize people, which then allows you to commit them to involuntary servitude. And so it's just transitioned from plantations to behind prison walls now. And it's actually larger than it was back when slavery existed. And I think that so much about what we're talking about is that this is like, one, it's a political tool. So they use it to gerrymander politics so that they move people from one area to another. They count them in districts. It increases their constituencies, which increases how many people represent that area in the government. And so it's politically motivated. It is also used as a way to replace the loss of manufacturing across the country. So it's what politicians use to basically go back to their constituents and offer as a new job and replacement for the loss of manufacturing. And then even more than that, I think it's a lot about erasure. And it's about controlling a population and controlling a community. And so when I think about justice kind of writ large, and at least like the niche that I play as someone who has been incarcerated, been through that system, who has been very kind of systematically erased for a number of years, for most of my young adult life. And as a visual artist, I know the power of what it means to actually be visible. And I think the way that I think about justice in general, at least again from that perspective, is how do we create systems of liberation that amplify and make visible other people who have been through that carceral system? And to me, that is like the leading way that we enter into having conversations around advocacy and policy changes. But it starts for me with creating the systems and structures to actually make visible so that people know what they're actually contending with and not just some kind of abstract number or statistic.
I think as for our project, the starting point was in 2014, when actually the Russian-Ukrainian war began. And it despite of all electronic devices that we all have, and that make this possibility to fix, to shoot very like available, we found out that we are lack of materials, still lack of materials. Of course, 10 years ago, 11 years ago, the situation was different, but still it was a problem for our directors, for our documentary community, for media and journalists, and that is why our intention, the intention of our founders was to collect these materials in a unified, structured database. It is important to mention that we are a closed database that is available only for experts, and after some procedure, yes, whether request, then chicken background, and then intro call, and so on and so forth. Also, I think that our the second part of our goal in terms of this question was the resistance to huge, enormous, large-scale Russian propaganda. It is so gigantic that even Ukrainians sometimes can't recognize or define it in some sources. Yes, in these terms, and this is our way to keep these materials, to interpret it, them, to collect them in order to be able to speak by ourselves, to tell our truth, and to amplify Ukrainian voices.
I'm going to kind of maybe step back a little bit to give a little bit of a broader context to what transitional justice has been in Latin America specifically. So, many countries in Latin America have had transitional justice processes, not just Colombia, right? So, moving back to how they, began with dictatorships in various countries falling, and then, the transitional justice systems that were set up in their wake. The idea, right, behind them was to kind of transition from this system of governing, which, originated from military dictatorship, right, ideology, into, let's say, a liberal form of democracy, right? And part of the transition was not only to do with justice, it was also to do with politics, right? And to bring the country itself into this new political arrangement. But of course, you had another paradox in that, right? Because the people who emerged victorious in a lot of those conflicts were in fact the people who were in charge of the military dictatorships. So within those systems of transitional justice, there were mechanisms also to maintain certain power structures, right, of these people who were in fact in power during the old system. So the criticism that has been given to a lot of, these transitional justice systems of the past, such as Argentina, Bolivia, Guatemala, was that they actually didn't undo these power structures, right? That were also the origins of the conflicts themselves. So Colombia is a bit different insofar as it didn't emerge from a military dictatorship. It didn't have that specific history, right? It had an internal, several internal armed insurgencies that had operated for several decades. But the Colombian government itself wasn't meant to go through this like giant transition from one sort of system of governing to another. And within that system of governing that wasn't supposed to change, another thing that wasn't supposed to change, and they explicitly left this out of the peace agreement, was the economic model of the country itself, right? And the role of that economic model within the conflict itself. So all of that was left out. And because of that, many people who consider themselves victims of that economic model, as it was also used within the context of the armed conflict, felt that they were left out, right? At the same time, let's maybe look at I don't want to say the good side, but like the more positive side to this. So turning our eyes again into Colombia itself, like you have to realize that, in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, there was a mass political genocide of leftist organizations, not just people who, were in various guerrilla factions, but also members of civil society. So people were incredibly afraid to speak their testimonies, to tell their experiences, to be out in public life, in political life, in meaningful ways, and actually to participate in politics. And I think the one thing that you really can say about the moment that we're in right now, especially with a leftist government in place right now, is that there's a lot of people who are able to participate now and actually, speak and tell about these histories in a way that they couldn't before. I mean, I think it remains to be seen how long that lasts, but to kind of tie these two things together, right? So on the one hand, you have many people who feel like they were left out of this process, and they were, right? And on the other, you also have, people who are also empowered to speak. I think what we're trying to do in Plano Negativo right now is work in that specific moment. We also all have our own political past, and, we're not exterior to this, I would say. And, our goal right now is to work in this moment where people can speak and tell their stories and get the message out, right? And have that be an important component of transitional justice and some form of, I don't think it's maybe reconciliation, but it's a step towards that, right? Just even being able to speak and to be out and engage and try to actually change systems.
Thank you. I think lots of you talked about the erasure and the absence of voices. So my second question now is about this and about how you look for truth within your project and how you work with the absence of data or sometimes the absence of memory. How do you recompose it somehow?
Sierra Leone's case is different because at the end of the Civil War, we, of course, with the help of the international community, we were very intentional about the transitional justice processes. It's a long story. It started at the peace negotiations. When the Civil War lasted for about 11 years, it became very complicated. There were nuances about victims and perpetrators. The other day I mentioned child soldiers, for instance. They were children conscripted to fight in a very brutal civil war. Primarily, their rights were violated, but they end up committing horrendous crimes in the civil war. And also because of the multiple warring factions in that conflict, it would have been very difficult to move on because everybody would have had their own truth. Everybody would have wanted to become the hero and blame the other faction. So therefore, at the peace negotiations in Lomé in 1999, there was an agreement to grant immunity to all warring factions. There would be no criminal prosecutions. But we were to create a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to deal with the conflict. And therefore, the commission was mandated to create an impartial historical record of the Civil War and profile recommendations. It did a fantastic job. That report and its recommendations have never been contested by anyone. So for us, that is very important because we know what happened where, who did what to whom. And we have very concrete recommendations in the way of promoting peace, reconciliation, and democracy in the country. So for the Center for Memory and Reparations, we base our work on that document. It is essentially trying to make sure that the government upholds its responsibility under those recommendations, especially for the category of victims that the TRC said must be taken care of. They continue to suffer in society, and because of the relative peace that we have in the country now, the government would rather not deal with these issues anymore. So one of the things I tell people who start to work for the center is that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's reports and recommendations are the Bible of this work, because it is so easy for people to find a reason to say you're making things up. But when the work itself is founded in this impartial record that was created after the conflict, then we feel like we are grounded in what the commission itself wanted us to do. One of the problems with the commission, though, was that there was a sort of absolute finality. They operated for 2 years, they produced a report and recommendation, and it was done. So what we don't have now is a mechanism that holds the government accountable to its responsibility. And that is why a center like mine is very important in the society, because we can go back to the government and say, yes, we have forgiven one another. This collective healing process is going on gradually, but these are the responsibilities that you have to do in order to be able to help this country to heal properly and to promote peace, reconciliation, and democracy.
So I think the way that we try to really focus on combating erasure, and really I think what we're talking about is like how to control the narrative in a lot of ways. And I think that so there's often a very strong community tie to people who have gone through the carceral system, and so you end up forming these very kind of intimate networks across the country. Because again, there are some people who have been incarcerated for 40, 50, 60 years, and they've transitioned through like all these different federal prisons, they've been in state prisons. And so within the carceral system itself, in the States, there is a very strong community that is built and support network. And I say that because again, I'm approaching this as an artist. Like, this is like how I kind of come into this work. And so there's also an incredible wealth of creative talent that exists within the carceral system. There's just a level of ingenuity that I haven't seen anywhere in the world, in that, like, when they're placed in this kind of context, they're creating out of urgency and necessity, and it's often sometimes collaborative, and it helps to form these stronger bonds in the community. And so the way that we try to support our artists when they come home is like, how do we actually listen to the artists, what they need? How do we remove all of the barriers that we can? And we do our best to connect them to industry leaders across the country to really amplify their stories. And we trust that the story, by amplifying them, that they also reach back into their community, which is often the case. And so I think the way that we're combating erasure is by elevating very creative, powerful storytellers in every single creative discipline that exists. And we're trying to support as many artists as we can, but also with the idea that they will reach back into the community of people who are still inside and do these big collaborative projects. And it really creates, I think, tangible connections and pathways for that visibility to be expanded to a much larger community. And so that's something that we work on very intentionally at the Center for Art and Advocacy.
I assume in our case we have an opposite problem, because probably you are all familiar with this definition of Russian-Ukrainian war as the most documented war in human history. But I think that is why we deal with the excess of data more than with a lack of data, and probably our project is a reflection of this situation, because we provide an opportunity for experts from different disciplines, spheres, to have an access to these materials in order to build powerful narratives, as you mentioned also, and the most powerful narratives, yes, and persuasive narratives to the world to amplify our voices and to amplify our truth. The other part of this problem probably deals with our department that is making interviews with eyewitnesses of Russian war crimes. And this is a very sensitive type of work, and that is why sometimes it is hard to for both sides to do this work, to handle it. But still, there are a lot of mechanisms and a lot of helpful instruments that make this process possible, and that is why I think that the biggest problem is to structure these narratives in a way that will be persuasive for not for us, for Ukrainians, but for the world. And I think that the trickiest part here is that we need to explain the role of Ukraine in European history and the role of Ukraine in this Russian imperialistic war, and to explain that it has its roots like in centuries, not like in years or decades. And also it is hard to explain that this is also a sort of decolonial war, and because it's not obvious for a lot of parts of the world that we have this colonial relationships with Russia, because Russian colonialism differs from, for example, Western colonialism. That is why it is so important to call Ukrainian experts to explain all these specific details, all these specific things, to provide all this very all this context, and also not to replace them by Russian experts and Russian voices, or just
So both in the work that we were doing as forensic architecture, working with the Colombian Truth Commission, and also the work that we're continuing to do in Plano Negativo, we really work historically, right? Like across many different time periods and, into the, let's say deeper past of the last century and the, some conflicts that, happened in recent years. So really we deal with a very wide variety of historical political conditions that either produced evidence in a certain way, whatever material evidence that was, or concealed it, right? Like there's also the mechanisms of, intentionally hiding or destroying evidence of a particular crime. We find this a lot in our work with enforced disappearance, right? Because in order to maintain the crime of enforced disappearance, you have to disappear both the body and the evidence of the crime itself continuously throughout time for it to be maintained as a crime. So, as a group, we started to look at these conditions that produced, let's say, both the crime itself, the moment of violence, but also the violence against the evidence itself, right? So we started to look at the lack of data not as, let's say, a barrier to truth, but also a part of the crime itself. So a lot of the methodologies that we are working with, both in, because we work a lot on enforced disappearance, but also we work a lot with environmental forms of violence, in which erasure, ecocide, the erasure of both communities who live in different ecologies, but also the ecology itself was, again, a part of the crime itself. And so we look at these dual erasures, right? And we, if we let ourselves get stopped by not finding evidence or material of a particular event or series of events, we would have a very difficult time, I think. But yeah, that's our approach, I think, to both material and method in more general terms. I think also because we work in different contexts, it's worth it to say we're not only working in Colombia as well. We're trying to navigate the different institutions, the different relationships that you have to maintain in order to, gain access to different documents. And it's kind of seeking materials is maybe like 80% of the work sometimes. Those of you who might be involved in journalistic work certainly know this, right? That, making petitions, continuously, especially pressuring governmental bodies to make information public is a huge endeavor. Especially, I would say that's a huge concern in the United States right now, right? And a lot of actually the material that we need working in Latin America is located in the United States, right? Because the United States was, the body that was also funding and training a lot of the militaries, to do the counterinsurgency campaigns that they did. So actually, the some of the data that isn't in these images right here, but that's a part of the case of aerial fumigation, was actually held by the U.S. State Department, and that's an ongoing FOIA, Freedom of Information Act battle that we're having to get that data released.
Thank you. From what you said already, we got some elements of answers, but my next question is about the collective aspect of your work, because each one of you, I feel like it's really collective. So I want to know how, you center the voices of people who are impacted, and how do you work collectively on your project and in all the processes?
So primarily the center was really focused on symbolic reparations. We wanted to facilitate this idea of collective healing and dealing with the past. And therefore, our focus was primarily to identify and protect the mass graves left around the country and to facilitate these traditional burial rites. And then secondly, to make sure that we take the history of the Civil War and its transitional justice mechanisms into classrooms to teach the young generation of Sierra Leoneans about their past. Because, we generally say children are the future leaders, but our belief is that these children cannot grow up into efficient leadership if they are not aware of their past, the errors of their past, and be able to avoid them in the future. However, as we did this work, evidently because of limited resources, we were not very much into dealing with the aspect of material reparations. But throughout the work, we met victims who were still suffering in post-conflict Sierra Leone as a result of the trauma that they went through during the Civil War. And we began to think that we cannot keep doing this work of symbolic reparation when there are people among us who actually need material reparations in order to be able to survive. Those who were amputated still are suffering from the effects of their amputation. And these amputations were brutal. These were not medical amputations. These were rebels chopping off people's body parts. And I spoke to somebody who runs a clinic in the country, and many of the fistula cases came from the sexual violence of the conflict. So we decided that we needed to amplify these voices, to help them call on the government to do something. So the center has now partnered with the Amputees and War Wounded Association to be able to compel the government to fulfill its responsibility under the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations. It's very difficult. The easy escapist response is that there's not sufficient resources for the government to be able to do this. But I believe that it is because we have not implemented the intentionality required to take care of these people. So now our work is really in partnership with the Amputees and War Wounded Association, so that we can really make sure that the government undertakes this very important responsibility, because these people are still suffering. And we could not continue to do transitional justice work, even as we created this idea that we were only going to deal with reparations while we see these victims suffering among us. And then we have also partnered with the Peace Museum in Freetown to be able to bring their story to the museum, so that visitors who are unaware of their situation can now become aware of it. Because ordinarily people in society like to say, oh, we never knew. We didn't know they were suffering. So one of the things we're trying to do is to put it in their faces, to say, your neighbor is going through this. And if the government has not undertaken its responsibility as a society, we also have a duty to take care of our brothers and sisters who are still suffering among us as a result of this violent conflict that are called in this country.
So I think the way that we kind of approach the collective or the community is that I think there are certain kind of bonds that form for people who have been through a kind of a similar system of oppression. And I think that we just very intentionally, we don't just fund like an artist once and then we kind of go away. Like once you become one of our fellows, you are like within the community. Like we build real community. We build real support systems around each artist and around the entire community. And I think we even look at that even kind of more holistically where, oftentimes with organizations that are working with artists or foundations or grants or funding institutions, we also very intentionally try to break down the silos of like funders versus artists and institutions versus artists. And we try to like specifically host events and gatherings where people all engage just as human beings as a way to kind of create a broader community. And then I think we approach our work in that way. And I think part of what we're also trying to do with the residency that we're building in Pennsylvania is that if you think about kind of the politics of this last election, Pennsylvania, the past two elections had went to the Democrats. This last one, it turned red and went to the Republicans. And the place that really flipped the entire state is Bucks County, Pennsylvania. And so it flipped it by a very slim margin. And so what we're thinking, or what I'm thinking, is like, how do we actually create a community and leverage the community that we have built by building a residency there, building an entire economy around that residency. And I'm currently working with the Pennsylvania State Legislature to offer a fellowship to other justice-impacted artists or socially engaged artists. And it's a pretty significant fellowship, but the idea behind that is it would be a big draw for other artists from New York City or New Jersey or Philadelphia to actually move to this place in Pennsylvania, which would then make them eligible for this large fellowship and also help build this kind of community. But ultimately, it's like we try to figure out how to support our artists in every way that they need, and those artists then form their own communities and support systems. And so we're trying to also create a very specific place-based space for them to do some of those things, with the idea that it could potentially change the demographics of an entire state, which could then potentially change the entire outcome of a national election, right? And so it's like, how do you actually build community, build support systems from all different aspects of various levels of supporters into a system or a structure that could potentially have real political outcomes?
I think that the first part of my answer will be about our collective, our team itself, because we have over 50 members in the hybrid format who work in hybrid format, both offline and online, in different countries, not only in Ukraine. And the second part will be that about our collaborating with other Ukrainian documenting initiatives and creating, participating in a catalog and systematizing this work with archives and documenting work in order to be able to exchange with some data or to check the background of each other work. And also, despite of we are closed database, of course we have this public public possibility of access. You can send us a request via our site, and this is a possibility for all different kind of experts from different kind of spheres and disciplines, as I've mentioned before, for the researchers of all kind of spheres. Yes, and as for my sphere that I'm responsible for, it is work with artists. We also have a possibility for individual artists to send a request for the work with our materials, and the laboratory that we launched is also a sort of way to build a sustainable system of working with the materials of the Ukraine War Archive, because we, within the frame of this project, we provide funds and budget for production, some artistic honorarium, and also the team of the Ukraine War Archive supports this work through all the way, through all the process, and we hope that this project will continue, and we will build such small, at least small thematic branches, yes, that help us to work with some specific topics. In the case of our laboratory, our topic is cultural heritage and memory. And yes, of course, it's a very huge topic, and in our terms, they are essential, because in the case of Russian-Ukrainian war, we deal with an attempt of erasure of a memory, of history, of cultural heritage as well, because this part of war is insane, let's say. I would say so, because Russians robbed museums, Russians robbed all kind of cultural institutions. I mean, they occupied the territories, and this is a big problem of. This is a part of this big problem. The other part is restitution. Yes, and all of them need to some immerse into this topic. Yes, but in general, I hope that if someone of you needs to have an access to our materials, you always can send us an access and the request, and get this access to work with them.
So building collective work and connection and network for Plano Negativo is immensely important. It's a part of our mandate as a group. So from the very beginning, we knew we didn't want to stay, again, only within the borders of Colombia. We really wanted to build a network across the Americas. So we're working with also different practitioners and emerging studios who are using investigative practices, visual research. There's a group in Mexico, there's a group in Brazil that we're working with. But we also recently launched, because another part of what we do is pedagogy and training and outreach, which is immensely important for us. We are a very small team, so we have to do it in a kind of small scale right now. But one of the things that we launched this past spring, so it's just finished now, was a furthering education class out of one of the universities in Bogota called Rosario. And this was an online virtual course that anyone actually could sign up to, not only in Latin America, but is Spanish speaking, so that was kind of a parameter. But we had people, I think, from 15 different countries across Latin America, but also people who were based in Europe, all participating in this course about visual analysis and practice. And through that experience, we learned and we were able to forge connections with also different groups working in Costa Rica, in Chile, in Argentina. And, we're kind of building slowly through, doing these very intentional outreach and pedagogic events towards this larger vision of a working network that can also support each other with resources, with, if you might not know how to do something, maybe someone, that you can call and they can help you. And that's certainly what we're trying to do at the moment. So I think I have a similar call maybe to you. If you or anyone would like to get involved, like to contact us, we would love to hear from you and figure out ways to work together.
Thank you so much. I think you gave us lots of elements, lots of inspiring, also concrete examples of how artists are change makers and also cultural workers. I have thousands of other questions, but I would like to open the floor to you in the audience. If you have some questions, feel free to ask them. I think there is a mic around.
I'm happy to ask one, but I'm also happier to pass it to someone else. Who is it? Oh, sorry.
Thank you. I would ask, first of all, thank you very much, all of you, for such inspiring work that you do in society and your approach to the arts. I have a question specifically for Mr. Krimes, and it relates to the difference in the group in which you all speak from the place of, all of you speak of the place of that who has been perpetrated. But in the case of Mr. Krimes, he's talking about a group of people that have been incarcerated, I suppose for many different reasons, but I find quite peculiar and interesting, and I want to hear you speak about the way in which you don't speak of the people being incarcerated as perpetrators of a crime, but instead of victims of one. And I think that, that's actually assuming that it's a choice, not to speak of the background of the artist that has been incarcerated, but instead of a system of incarceration that is the perpetrator. So just give me a little bit of sense of your choice of not speaking of the background of the artist as a so-called criminal, and instead of the artist as a maker and the system as a criminal.
It's a great question. And I think that there are so many things that feed into our carceral system. And so by the time most people get enmeshed in the system, they've already encountered all sorts of other things that the systems outside of the carceral state have already kind of been punishing them in a variety of different ways, through redlining, through targeted policing, through just complete oppression of entire communities. And it creates a system where it's people, most of the crimes that people are committing are out of survival or deep trauma. And so all of this stuff is kind of, it's constructed and it's built for people to fail in those ways. And unsurprisingly, that's what happens. But that's what's intended to happen. And so I often don't focus on the crimes that people have committed. In some cases, they're horrific, right? In some cases, they're not at all. It's such a wide range. But I also just generally believe that people who have been incarcerated, and many times, again, for decades, some wrongfully convicted, it runs the entire gamut. But like, people are not the same as when they went in, as to when they come home. And I think for me, I choose to work with people off of the character of who they are today and not what they've done. And it's not my position or job to try to hold them to account for things that they've done in their past if today they are showing me that they are someone different. And I think that that's why I kind of focus on that lens, in that I believe that everyone deserves second chances, third chances, fourth chances, particularly when they're coming from systems that are designed to oppress them, right? I think I have a slightly different viewpoint of people who are in the carceral system and they've come into it from all sorts of positions of power and privilege. I have a slightly different view on that. But again, those aren't the people that we're funding or working with either.
Thank you. Thank you all. It was an important panel to close the forum. I guess my question is more for Joseph and Hannah. You've been very close to the Truth and Commission in your country, and so if there were a way to recommend, since it's the title, a better way of shaping those truth commissions, as we've seen the failure of many, omitting people, in the case of Peru, being with a lot of bias and perpetuating the power structure. So if there was a way for you speculatively to recommend the best shape of those process in the future.
Okay. It's a massive question, because I think it doesn't begin at the establishment of the Truth Commission itself. It's rather like pulling back and looking at the peace agreement or the, quote unquote, end of conflict moment and what is expected to emerge or transform, right? In Colombia specifically, a lot of the criticism that is especially being spoken of right now, which, I haven't spoken a lot about what is happening right now and how this process has transformed, but just to say briefly, there's the proposal of Petro, who's the current president, was to make something called paz total, like total peace, right? So in this vision, he wanted to also open up the possibility of the peace process with all the other armed groups that are operating in the country. Because, of course, if you're going to only make a peace process with one, you're not actually ending the conflict, right? And so this, this vision of kind of total peace has been what the government has been trying to work on in the last years. There have been certain moments of truce. There's a massive collapse right now, and what many people are saying is a failure. But one of the criticisms in general was that the way that the Colombian armed conflict was perpetrated also was very much in a kind of fragmentary, territorially specific sense. So different territories, what they're called territories, experienced different forms of violence. And because there was a kind of the transitional justice kind of tried to take everything on at once, right? And tried to make kind of a blanket approach, right, to making peace and reconciliation in this area of the country, in this area. And not everywhere is the same, and they continue to not be the same, right? And the conditions of security and the overlapping forms of violence and not violence at the same time continue to kind of challenge the structure. Right. So, a recommendation that several, policy, critics have made is that a more kind of territorially specific vision of transitional justice is needed, especially in countries that have experienced very fragmented, dividing forms of violence, and really addressing things at the local level and a more regional level would kind of give you more, let's say better forms to access of justice.
In the Sierra Leonean sense, after 11 years of conflict, we were so focused on peace and reconciliation that we sort of ignore the aspects of accountability. So when they went to the peace negotiations in Lomé, they offered blanket amnesty to all warring factions, which later even affected the peace process because, of course, the rebels realized that they cannot be held accountable, punished for what they did, so they were not very committed to the follow-up after the peace agreement. Now, that later changed a little bit, and that is why some of you who have studied international law knows that Sierra Leone has the Special Court for Sierra Leone, which is not the International Criminal Court. It is a treaty court between the government of Sierra Leone and the United Nations. It is called the Special Court because it was not meant to be. It only came into effect because the rebels refused to comply with the peace process and continued to commit atrocities. So this court was created to deal with those who bear the greatest responsibility for violations of international humanitarian law in Sierra Leone. That tried about 13 people. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, like I said earlier, did a fantastic job. It was affected by the fact that it worked a little bit simultaneously with the court. So they spend a lot of resources trying to convince those, especially the perpetrators who participated, that they will not be taken to court based on their testimony to the commission. Now, I think the fundamental flaw with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was that it placed so much, reliance on the government to follow up after it did its work. So it created fantastic recommendations that were supposed to promote peace, reconciliation, and a new nation, a democratic states. What I believe it should have done, it's also created the follow-up institutions. So it recommended reparations. It recommended that a victims trust fund be created. I think it should have created those institutions before it closed. Because what happened was it only recommended them and then they closed, and then the government said, yeah, we'll do that later. And it's been decades of later. So I think If there is any Truth Commission that wants to learn from the Sierra Leone Commission, I believe that it is fundamental that it creates institutions that specifically deal with reparations and victim trust fund instead of relying on the government's commitment to do that afterwards.
Thank you so much, each one of you. It's time to wrap us for now, but there are more panels and workshops to come, so you're welcome to stay and keep being here. Thank you.